Hi everyone, it's Megan with Recap Mason Jars. Back in my kitchen, yesterday I was on Instagram showing you guys how to make bagels, and today I have my sourdough starter here today to talk to you about sourdough starter and how you can make your own and keep it alive, and how things you can use it for. So, first gonna set you up there. So like I mentioned yesterday on Instagram, we kind of deemed this week bread week to share with you guys things you can do in the kitchen and things that you can make. I also said yesterday our bagels from yesterday. Here's the finished blueberry bagel that we made. This recipe did require yeast. But you can also, if you don't have yeast right now, you can use sourdough starter instead and make sourdough bagels. I've been experimenting with my starter, and I've made bagels, I've made English muffins, donuts even, and of course you can make sourdough loaves to have bread. So there's a lot to a starter, but it is very simple to make and to keep alive. And so I'm just going to kind of talk to you about it, show you the steps to feed a starter, because you do have to feed it every day. It's like having a little low maintenance pet in your house. The hardest part for me is just remembering every day that I need to feed it. But it is very simple. And you'll see, you can read, it's one of those things that there's so much information out there online, and a lot of it's conflicting, so you just kind of have to start it and go with it, listen to your starter. It will, depending on the temperature in your house and the climate and lots of different factors, yours is going to be different than mine, and so you just kind of have to troubleshoot, figure out if it's not working, what you need to do. And I can give you kind of some tips as we go along. I started this almost a month ago, right at the beginning of quarantine, and it is actually pretty active now. It does take, if you're starting it from scratch, just keep in mind, you can't start it today and then bake with it tomorrow. It's going to at least take probably a week before it's active and ready to use. Mine probably took a couple weeks because it is cooler here. We actually have snow on the ground now, apparently, in Pennsylvania. And it's definitely less than 70 degrees in here, which it is more active in warmer temperatures. So when I had a starter over the summer last year, I had in a quart jar like this, and it was doubling. It should double in size every day. It was overflowing the jar. Every day I'd wake up to like a mess because it was so active, so bubbly. Which was good, but definitely recommend if you're in a warmer climate and you're seeing that it's bubbling over the jar, maybe start it in a larger jar. But right now this quart jar, this is actually a Bormioli jar, so it's a little bit bigger than a quart jar. It's working perfect for me. So what is sourdough starter? Basically, you use it instead of like commercial yeast that you would buy at the store. So it's kind of what people used back in the day before, we had commercial yeast. It uses wild yeasts. So there's wild yeast basically all around us. And there's wild yeast in flour that you can activate by mixing it with water and just giving it time. It is a fermentation process. So the process of this is to activate those yeasts from your flour. And unlike commercial yeast, if you bake with sourdough starter, it will take a lot longer. But with more time, you get more flavor, and to me, it's a lot more rewarding at the end, because you can end up with a loaf of sourdough that literally all it is flour and water and probably a little bit of salt. But it's a lot of science. If you have kids, and they need a science project, there's so much that you can learn about this process of sourdough starter, and it's really cool, really interesting. So that's kind of the basis of what sourdough starter is. How to start it. If you know somebody who has a sourdough starter, I would definitely recommend asking them for some if you want it. That way you can start baking with it right away, and you can nurture it and feed it and keep it alive. And as you'll see, if somebody has sourdough starter, I'm sure that they have some that they would be willing to give you. You do end up with like a discard every time you feed it. So it's a great thing to share with your friends, because you'll end up with some starter that you might not need. So if you don't know somebody who has a sourdough starter like me, my friends are kind of all weirded out by the things I'm growing in my kitchen between sourdough starter and scobies and things like that. You can start your own. So it is very easy, but like I said, it'll just take a little bit more time. All you need is a mason jar. I guess you could use other vessels, but a mason jar is definitely the best. It's what I see almost everyone using, because for one, it's glass, and of course we want to not use plastic. We definitely don't want to use metal, because that will mess with the fermentation process a little bit. So we like the glass jar. It's also see-through, so you can see how much your starter is rising every day. And you can also look and see the bubbles that are happening underneath to see how active it is. And all that's very important. You want to be able to see what's going on inside the jar. So you need a jar, any size. Like I said, a quart works really well. I had mine last summer in like a half gallon because it was so active and so bubbly. You also just need flour. I'm using all-purpose flour. You can use lots of different types of flour. I've used bread flour before too. I know a lot of people use whole wheat flour, which I've also heard that helps activate the process a little better, just because of the content of whole wheat flour. Has more of those yeasts in there, and it can help activate your starter a little bit. It's also a great thing if you are having trouble getting your starter active and to double in size. It's a great thing, maybe mix in a little bit of whole wheat flour to just kind of help that process along. So yeah, you can use a mix of flours. I've seen some people like to, have a couple different starters, so one kind of all-purpose and one whole wheat. So you can kind of basically do whatever you want, figure it out, see what works best for you. But I am using whole wheat flour, and I have a jar here of water that I have previously boiled and set to room temperature, so it's basically distilled water. And I just, after I boil it, put it in this jar, let it cool to room temperature. So that's basically all you need. I also have a wooden spoon, because you will need to mix. You will need something to top the jar. I use a coffee filter, which is a great thing to use, which you probably have in your house already. You can also use a kitchen towel, or like a cheesecloth. Anything just to cover it, but also to let air in and out, which is important for the fermentation process. It doesn't need to be like a one-way valve or anything like a lot of other fermentation requires. Just something to keep fruit flies out and things like that, but also to allow some airflow. So let's see, I will show you what's kind of going on inside this jar. Let's see if you can see any of the bubbles happening. I just fed this last night, so there's not a ton of bubbles yet, but there are some. And it did double in size, I think. A lot of people, which I probably should do, and I haven't done, a lot of people will put like a rubber band, once they do it, a rubber band to where it starts, so that they can really see how much it's growing. Or you can even use like a little piece of tape, some kind of marker. What's great with mason jars, this one doesn't have it, but a lot of them have like the marks on the side, so you could even use that. Do you need the fermentation lids for this? No, so a lot of like, if you're fermenting vegetables, you could use our lid with like our fermentation valve, and that's like a one-way valve that won't let air in. For this, it's similar to like kombucha. You want like the air flowing in and out. So coffee filters work the best for me, but like I said, you could use towels and things. I guess if you didn't have any of that, for some reason you don't have a towel or a coffee filter or a cheesecloth, you could probably use the lid and just maybe like burp it a little bit a couple times a day to just let that air out. So yeah, you can basically use whatever. So the thing about, let's see, so that's how you start it. If you want to start it, you do 4 ounces of flour, 4 ounces of water. You put it in the jar and you just stir it, put your top on, and you set it somewhere in your house for 24 hours. Like I said, a lot of people like to put them on top of the refrigerator just because it's a little warmer up there. I just set mine on the shelf somewhere where I will see it every day and remember to feed it. And then you have to feed it every day. So every 24 hours. Some people do it every like 6 to 8 hours, like twice a day. If you are having trouble getting it started and getting it bubbly and getting it to double in size, you might want to try feeding it more often, so a couple times a day. But I've just been feeding mine once a day because that's all I can really remember to do. And it seems to be mine did take a few weeks, and now it's finally really like doubling in size, so that's a good thing. To feed it, the first thing you're gonna do is to pour out, actually, I have a bowl here, pour out about half of it. You really only need like a little bit in your jar to keep it going. So I'm just gonna start by doing that. It's very goopy, very thick, and you'll be able to see the texture change as it matures. And then I'm just going to kind of scrape the rest kind of back down. You really want to try to keep it from being on the edges of the jar as much as possible. Alright. So I poured out about half. You can see. Maybe you can't see, but it's about here in the jar. And so I'm just going to add more flour and more water to it. And that's really its food. It's going to eat off of the flours, and it's going to help keep it alive. So the important thing when you're doing this, some people say it should be a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio, starter, flour, and water. I think what's important is that it's equal amounts of flour and water, and you want that to be more or equal to the amount of starter you have so that it has enough food. If you have a lot of starter and you're not giving it enough flour and water, it's going to be hungry. So every day I just pour about half starter and I add 4 ounces of water to it and 4 ounces of flour. So I have a scale here and I'm just going to pour in about 4 ounces. Alright, that was 4.1, but I think it's okay. And then I'm going to zero it out and do 4 ounces of flour. Okay, we're almost there. Okay. And then I'm just going to use my wooden spoon and mix that up. And like I said, you just want to make sure you don't have flour on the sides of the jar or anything like that. You because you want it all mixed together really well. Alright. Make sure it's fully incorporated. And then your starter is nice and satisfied, has a full meal. Alright, and that's basically all you have to do once a day. Just mix in some more flour, more water. Put your coffee filter or your towel or whatever you're using on top of the jar, and you can put it back on your shelf. So the discard, a lot of people are a little weary of sourdough starter because you do end up with like a discard every day. And they feel like that's kind of wasteful, but there are so many things. You don't have to throw it away. There's so many things you can do with your discard. I think it's actually a lot more wasteful if you don't throw away half of it every day, because then you're really going to have to double the amount of flour and water every day that you're adding to it. So even in a week's time, that's going to get crazy out of hand. You're going to be using up so much flour, and you're going to have so much starter. So it's really important that you have a discard, that you get rid of about half of it every day. And like I kind of mentioned earlier, this is great if you have a friend who wants to get started with sourdough. You can give that to them. And if your starter is matured, they can already start cooking with it right away, and then they can kind of go off and have their own starter. So it's a great thing to share with friends. You can also obviously use this to bake with. So if you're baking every day, you're not going to have any waste really. You're just going to use up your discard. I've seen online, if you look online just at ways you can use your sourdough discard, there's so many creative things you can do with it. Basically anything that you make with like a batter or a dough, you can use it for. So I've seen people use it for pancakes. They, if you're feeding your starter every night, you have your discard, you can pop it in the fridge and use it in the morning for pancakes, crepes, bagels, like I said, English muffins, obviously loaves of bread. I've even seen people use it to make their own flour tortillas. There's so many things that you can use it for. And like I said, you can even refrigerate it for a little bit and use it in a couple days. So I really encourage you to try to find creative ways to use your starter. If anyone is watching that has a starter and they have figured out a way to something to do with their discard, please share it. We'd love to have other ideas on things you can do with it. Also, something that's important to know is that if you're not baking, so if you're just keeping your starter alive but you're not necessarily baking with it a lot, you can stick it in the refrigerator, and then you only have to feed it once a week. So that will eliminate a lot of the discard you have from it, and also just a good idea if you're not baking with it. And it does have to be very mature and active before you do that. You don't want to start it and then immediately refrigerate it. You want it to be a very mature starter before you do that. But yeah, so you can throw it in the fridge and only have to feed it once a week. I've also seen some crazy things people do with it, that they actually dry it out. So they kind of dehydrate it, make it into flakes, and then you can store it for months without having to feed it. And then when you're ready to start baking again, you just mix it with water and flour and kind of reactivate all of those yeasts in there. So there's so much to learn about sourdough starter, and now's a great time if you're home. Like I said, baking with sourdough takes a longer time, which is great right now for me because it's not a lot of work. It just takes a lot of time. So you might have to fold it, do a couple folds with your dough, and then wait an hour, and then fold it and wait an hour, and fold it and wait an hour. So it can be hard because you kind of have to devote a day of being home in order to bake with it in certain situations. But that's what's great right now, is that kind of home all the time, so it's a great time to start learning about starter, especially if you can't find yeast right now and you're having a hard time finding yeast at the store. This is a great solution to that. So I think that's about it. Like I said, I'm going to put this back on my shelf and feed it again tomorrow. Let me think. Also, if you guys have any questions about that, I don't see any questions right now, but if you have any questions at any time, feel free to message us about it and we can help you out. We can help you figure out, help you troubleshoot if you're having trouble with your starter that you've made. Give you some ideas on how to get it active and get it working. Also, wanted to let you guys know right now on masonjars.com, we have made all our ebook downloads free for you. So if you're at home and need recipes or need ideas for your kids, how to keep your kids busy, we have a lot of awesome ebooks that you can download for free, and kind of gives you something to do at home, ideas, suggestions on things to make and creative things to do with your kids. We do have a fermentation ebook, which is such a good idea right now. I know it's kind of hard because you're trying to stock up at the grocery store and limit your trips, but you still want fruits and vegetables and things that go bad quick. So I'd really recommend looking into fermenting them. That's a great way to preserve your vegetables and create probiotics that are so good for you, and just makes them last a lot longer than fresh vegetables. So we have a fermentation ebook that, there's recipes in there like making your own hot sauce or sauerkraut or kimchi, or even just carrots, giardiniera, lots of different kinds of vegetables. You can basically ferment any vegetable. So lots of recipes in there. If you're home with your kids and you need ways to keep them busy, we have a kids activity ebook. So there's coloring pages, there's things that they can go outside and explore, and it's very educational, teaches them a lot of things about outdoors and about insects. So we have that. We also have one for your pets. So if you can't get to the store for shampoo or grooming, things like that, there's a lot of home DIY ideas, recipes for your pets as well. So I encourage you to check them out at masonjars.com. Let's see if give you one last look here. This is our discard that I might use to make pancakes or something tomorrow. And then our starter here. So if you guys have any questions, let us know at any time. We'd love to hear from you. If you also maybe already have your own starter and have other tips to share with us, please let us know. We love to hear from you guys. Hope everyone's staying safe and healthy, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.